Hey there everyone, Pal here, and welcome back. We're talking Star Citizen again, and today I'm gonna dive down the rabbit hole. Hopefully you guys want to go for a ride with me on this one. I think this one could be a very cool conversation. It's also a very broad conversation that goes well beyond Star Citizen, goes into almost every aspect of our lives, though for the most part I'm going to focus it on Star Citizen or the game industry in general. And that's how the media we consume affects our reality, gives us predetermined perceptions of our, well, in this case, video games, Star Citizen in particular, but every aspect of our lives. I got to this because I spent the last few days diving back through a lot of forum posts, watched a lot of Star Citizen videos, and gone through the comments section, and I know, that's always a dangerous area, and I'm not in some angry defensive point of view here. It amazed me because on one side you have the defenders, the white knights, and then on the other side you have the naysayers, the haters. And while a lot of times they were arguing past each other, I saw some key threads within both of them that were at the same time both true. On the naysayer side, there was a lot of this, the game's 4.5 years in development. All you have is an alpha that crashes a lot, doesn't run very well, has limited content. And I think most of us would agree that is true. I'm sure there's going to be people that will come here and tell me I'm wrong there, but I would say the amount of content we have in 2.6.2 is somewhat limited. I would say it's kind of clunky. I would say it doesn't really run well. And what we actually have for 4.5 years worth of work, playable right now, isn't all that great. On the other side, you'll have people saying, well, yeah, but that alpha, that early work of gameplay is only a small snippet of what they're doing. And what you can do in that alpha is unlike things you can do in any other game out there. And that's just in the alpha. And that again is also true. There are other games out there that have small aspects of this or that, but Star Citizen is wholly unique in its alpha gameplay of putting all these elements into one larger game. This is also true in my opinion. So both of these things are true, yet the reasons that they've come to those conclusions are, well, that's kind of what I wanted to get at. How did we get to the point where both sides are true, both sides are angry, and yeah. And what I came back to is a lot of this starts with what your mentality was at when you first really approached Star Citizen. And if we go back to the Kickstarter, this is going to be where a lot of this starts off at, and we look at it, and there were a lot of great promises and everything. But I think the big thing was the date. When I first went to the Kickstarter page and I read that date and it was 2.5 years out, 2 years out, I know personally, internally, I compartmentalized that. I looked at the list of features they were saying and I said, there's no way. I said in my mind, that's not going to happen. This is 5-8 years worth of work to do this. So when I backed the game on the Kickstarter site, I did not take into account that date really at all. That to me, that was just like, we need to put something in here, so we put something in there. However, if you were somebody that went into that same site and didn't really think of that, just looked at it and be like, wow, this game must be almost ready to be playable. They just need to do some polish on it. They need to finish it up and we'll have it in 2 years. Well, your takeaway 5 years, 4.5 years later is going to be vastly different than somebody went in expecting to wait 5 to 8 years. And again, both of them are somewhat true. The person that read that date and was like, it doesn't seem reasonable, I'm not going to expect that, is just as valid as the person that read that date and maybe was naive, but believed it because that was the date they were given, that was the time frame they were given, and to be pissed off about it is true. We can expand even well beyond that. If say you were somebody that didn't catch on to Star Citizen until last year, and you came across it, and your first experience was jumping into YouTube, and you just see this video of somebody vastly praising it. Maybe it was the CitizenCon 2016 video, and that was your first experience of Star Citizen. When you eventually went over and maybe bought in at the $35 price tag or whatever, or is it $45? Doesn't really matter. I forget the exact price. When you probably finally jumped into the game, you were probably a little more optimistic, open-minded about it. And when you got in and, say, for the first time you and a friend spawned at Crusader, climbed into a spaceship and flew off together, you were probably a lot more optimistic about it. You were probably, wow, this is really cool. We're both in there. You get out of the pilot seat. I'll get into the pilot seat. Now I'm flying. Oh, I pulled out my pistol. I shot you. Now you're dead. Now I'm flying. And all of this happens dynamically. You were probably really positive about it. Whereas if maybe your first experience was, God forbid, a Derek Smart comment, Derek Smart Twitter or whatever, and then for some reason you still ended up buying into the game at $45, well, you could go in and have the exact same experience, but whereas this other person over here is positive about it, to you it could be, well, I'm only running at 22 frames a second. Why is this frame rate so bad? Oh, I disconnected. This is broken. I can't stay together. Oh, I fell out of the bottom of the ship. Man, this game really, really sucks. Again, both experiences are true, but your takeaway is very different based on how you went in. And it doesn't have to be something like that. It could be friends. When I talk to people, I've mentioned several times now, I'm a member of a larger gaming community, and we're constantly recruiting within ourselves. People play all the different games and we're bringing them over. I'm one of those people that I very carefully, I put out the positives, but I also put out the negatives because I want people to go in with as good of a base level expectation of, yeah, it's got a lot of promise, but it also has a lot of negative. However, there's other people within our community, in our group, that are very much one or the other. So if they're the ones doing the talking, you're going to get all the really great selling points. You're going to get the points of this massive universe, all the different spaceships, all the different professions, all of these things which are true. I'm doing air quotes there. You can't see, but I'm doing quotes. True as in works in development, things that are planned, and all these positive elements. But if you talk to someone who maybe isn't a fan of the game within the same community, they're going to tell you how the game is probably still 2 to 3 years from launch, from even a beta beginning launch, meaning we only have 1 or 2, maybe 3 of the galaxies, and so on. They're going to give all these negative points. And again, a lot of what they're saying, yeah, we're probably still 2-ish years from an initial launch of the game. A lot of the systems are still being in development. There's a lot of promises that we've been promised, but we're still waiting to see fruition on. Both, again, the same. And it all really just comes down to that exact point, trying to filter through and all this different noise going on that gives us these predetermined perceptions going in. And I don't know if there's really a point here. It's interesting to me. I find it quite fascinating. Another great one that just came up recently was Mass Effect Andromeda. So before Mass Effect came out, I had access or got access to it on Tuesday, but starting around Thursday of last week, all of a sudden all of these videos started coming out of these funky facial animations and these odd walking mechanics. And by seeing that first, I went into Mass Effect Andromeda almost predetermined to watch for these. Like every cutscene, I was looking for awkward facial animations. I was walking around the spaceship looking for these weird glitches and stuff happening. I didn't actually want to do that, but because that was what my experience had been leading into the actual playing of the game, I kind of had that happen. At one point, I actually had to step back and I'm like, look, stop paying attention to those things. I forced myself to try and focus beyond that. And since I did that, I'm enjoying the game more. I'm not here to talk about Mass Effect Andromeda. Those things are definitely there, but there's so much more to that game that I was overlooking, completely missing, because I was focused on this one little spot because of this predetermined perception. I'm still trying to find a better word for it, or better term for it, because I don't like predetermined perception at all. It's just too many P's. Let's go back to Star Citizen. So the footage you've been watching in the background has all been the new Drake Buccaneer. And so maybe this is the first time you've seen the Drake Buccaneer. You might have seen a screenshot of it on the site. They've talked about it around the verse a little bit. But maybe this video here would be your very first time experiencing the Drake Buccaneer. I could sit here and I could tell you, you know what, this ship is quite impressive. It brings Hornet-like firepower, not Hornet equivalent, but Hornet-like firepower in a much cheaper platform. It's surprisingly maneuverable. It's got a pretty good high speed for what it is. Those big engines are great. Lacks a little bit of shield, but it's a really good single-person fighter that is really, really enjoyable. Or I could sit here and I could tell you, This thing is just a piece of crap compared to the good ships. I could say that, you know what, the Hornet's got so much better shields, it has better firepower, it has room, the Super Hornet has room for that second player. The only thing this has going for it is it's got slightly higher top speed. The Super Hornet is just all around better than this thing. The guns break off easily. The cockpit looks like it's something out of a 1940s fighter with digital screens on it. The cockpit is hideous. That's kind of true also. But depending on which message I gave you, when you would get into the game and maybe mess around with the Buccaneer, you would have some of these predetermined impressions, or predetermined perceptions. Impressions would actually be a better word for it. And affect it. And the truth is, it's kind of a little bit in between both. The ship does have surprisingly good firepower for what was a $110 ship. Its price range is comparable to the Gladius, and in terms of firepower, it makes the Gladius look a little bit silly. The Gladius is obviously more maneuverable and all that. It doesn't have the sustainability of the Hornet or the Super Hornet, but it does bring some pretty good firepower. All these things are kind of true about it, but depending on who you experience that information from, if they only sell one side or the other side, you're going to go in with those predetermined perceptions. It's a very strange, I don't know if it's strange, but it's an interesting, I find it interesting as a concept, as I find myself going back through a lot of the media I've consumed in the last 5 years and been like, did I really give it a fair shakedown, or was I already negative on it? I would look at something like maybe Final Fantasy 15. I was completely turned off of that game right from the get-go because the characters that were your party looked like in sync, and it didn't appeal to me at all. Now, this wasn't somebody else. Obviously, this wasn't a news media. This wasn't Twitter, whatever. This was put out information from Square Enix, but it gave me this predetermined perception that I wasn't going to like the game. Now, I've never picked it up, but I've actually watched other playthroughs of it. I watched Jesse Cox play through the entire thing, and while I still dislike the look of the primary party characters, overall, I thought the game looked to be pretty darn good. But had I not seen any of that and just, hey, Final Fantasy 15, here it is, and the cover been like maybe the car and an airship or something in the background without any of the characters, when I first picked it up, while I would have disliked the initial cutscenes and the characters and everything, I would have been far more open-minded to the game, and I probably would have enjoyed it quite a bit. But because of the media that they put out ahead of time, I had already determined I don't think I'm going to like this game, and I had written it off. It happens. I also look at like some of my favorite games, not some of, my favorite games, the Dark Souls series, and I wonder how many people have written that franchise off as something they wouldn't enjoy, because the message around it, while bearing truth, is also kind of wrong. The whole perception around Dark Souls is this punishing, death creation, dying over and over and over again game that is about the challenge. And while that is to no small extent true, it misses the larger point. The whole thing about Dark Souls and the dying and everything is, one, it's fair, but two, each death is not a loss. At least if you're playing it reasonably intelligent. If you're a brand new player and you're moving on through and you get to a point where you get shot by an archer and you die, and that archer, you didn't see him at first. Well, if you are playing it or approaching it in the way the game actually wants you to do, you now know that archer's there. So yes, you might have lost X amount of souls or whatever it was to get up to that point, but you've learned the level design a little bit. You've gone ahead and you've expanded your knowledge. You've solved a little bit of the puzzle. So the next time you move up, you know I'm going to put a tree between me and that archer. I'm going to snipe that archer myself from here, or I'm going to charge him down. And the next time you'll be able to hopefully get past that part. And then, 5 minutes later, you'll come to an ambush and you'll die again. And yeah, you might lose those souls, but you've now learned, okay, so at this point here, there's an ambush. So now I have to learn how to overcome them. The Dark Souls games, at least the PvE side of them, is almost like a puzzle. It's a fighting puzzle game where you're learning to get through the environments by playing the environments. But you don't ever really hear that part. That's not really explained. But if I took someone that had never seen or played a Souls game and explained it to them that way, don't worry about the deaths, just learn from each death, learn why you died, and so you can overcome it later on, they're probably going to go about it much easier, a lot less frustrated that someone's going in planning to be punished over and over and over again and die. Obviously, I went off on a little bit of tangent there. I love talking about Dark Souls. I just, yeah, I find it fascinating. I look at a lot of Star Citizen, and there's so many positives, but there are also so many areas of concern. Both of them are true. It just really depends on how you're going to come about it. If you want to look at it, if your initial takeaways were positive, your initial impressions were positive because of whatever, it's good. If not, it's bad. And the last part I'm going to leave you on, this is going to be very shallow on it. This also pertains to our news media, our political standings, and all of that. I'm not going to go into it at all, but really take into account where you stand politically, and then look at the media you consume and see if that reinforces it or not. And if it does reinforce it, maybe consider the other side. And this doesn't matter which side you stand on, because in both cases, there's normally legitimate arguments on both sides. And it's important to try and see both sides a little bit. You don't need to agree with both sides. You don't need to find that middle ground. You're perfectly capable of being on one side or the other. But it's important to at least understand the core concepts of the opposite argument, why maybe someone thinks differently than you. Alright guys, hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that did pertain mostly to Star Citizen. That was definitely far more open-ended than a lot of the videos I do. The next video will be a lot more focused. I think I'm going to do one on exploration and the Carrack in particular. Until next time though, this has been Paler. Thanks for watching.